Don't take any more time. I'm going to read your Bible now. I'm going to introduce my good friend and brother. We have a couple of friends and brothers over here. Besides over there, we are always, you'd think we're brothers and sisters because she moves me along very quickly. But let me do it right now. Professor Lawrence Freeman has been involved in Africa for 30 years plus. He's a researcher, writer, consultant, and speaker on a variety of topics concerning Africa. He provides a unique economic political analysis of the African continent with a focus on the importance of infrastructure for promoting economic growth. He has written hundreds of articles and reports on Africa, including essays on China, Africa. He's a big proponent of that, and he'll talk on it today, I'm sure. And U.S.-Africa policy. Mr. Freeman has visited the continent at least 25 times. In 2010, he was invited to join the inaugural advisory committee to AFRICOM under General Kip Ward, my good friend. In 2014, he was appointed vice chairman of the Lake Chad Basin International Scientific Committee. Mr. Freeman has spearheaded an interbasin water transfer project called Transaqua to save the shrinking Lake Chad. He was a featured speaker along with President Buhari at the International Conference to Save Lake Chad, held in Abuja from February 26 to 28, 2018. He is an adjunct instructor at Catonsville Community College of Baltimore County, of Frederick Community College, and Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, where he teaches several courses on African history. He's a creator of the blog Lawrence Freeman African and the World.com. Check it out. Dr. Freeman is an outspoken critic of the ICC attacks on African countries. He led a delegation of American state legislators to Sudan, who suddenly exposed the charges that the Khartoum government was engaged in slavery as fraudulent. This is going to be quite an interesting conversation. Please join me in representing no other than our illustrious
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be here. Henrietta is, we've been working together for many, many years. And as I get older, I probably forget how many years it is. I'm going to be 75 next month. I keep very active. I hike and backpack in the woods several hundred miles a year. So
all right.
You look like. And just a slight correction in my bio. I've now been to Africa about 36 times, mainly in Nigeria, a lot in Sudan, and most recently a lot of time I spent in Ethiopia, but also Cote d'Ivoire, Chad, and a few other countries.
How about Congo?
I have not been to the Congo.
Why not?
I haven't been invited.
Come over.
Okay. So what I'm going to do in my 20 minutes is I'm going to unite faith and economics, which have been the two subjects we've had all day today. And I'll start with quoting Pope Paul VI, one of his encyclicals in 1967. He said, development is the new name for peace. And I've not only adopted that perspective in my own outlook, but I've provided the scientific economic principles to support that idea. Because without development, we will not have peace, we will not have security. And therefore, we are obligated to raise the standard of living of every human being. And if we don't do that, we will live in this world today, which is unacceptable. We have, in Africa alone, over 500 million people living in poverty. This is unacceptable, and this is the cause for unrest throughout the world. So it's the obligation of every government, and this is what I've told all the governments I've met with, and I've had a few and a couple of presidents here and there. It's the obligation of government to promote the general welfare of the people. Now that is one of the most beautiful phrases in the U.S. Constitution. It's in the preamble. And that I live by that principle. And that's what government is there to do. The question is how to do it. So to discuss development, there are two essential concepts we must think about. One is physical economy, and the other is productive credit, or credits for development. I call myself a physical economist. I do not involve myself in monetary gains, speculation, stock market prices, real estate values, buy low, sell dear. That don't have anything to do with that. I look at an economy physically. What are the components that are necessary to raise the people's standard of living per square hectare, per capita? I examine electricity from that standpoint. I examine farming from that standpoint. I examine railroads from that standpoint. What is the actual physical wealth? And what is the ingredients necessary to promote that physical wealth? Credit is essential. And this is not understood by many more people in the United States, around the world anymore. But it has been practiced. Credit is what you issue today that takes you to tomorrow. How do you build a nuclear power plant? How do you build a railroad? How do you build anything that requires time and billions of dollars of investment? You need long-term, low-interest credit. That's the way major economies in the world have been built. The United States was built that way. After the war, Germany was built that way. Japan was built that way. China is built that way. You provide long-term, low-interest credit for key sectors of infrastructure, primarily electricity and railroads, and manufacturing. And it's the lack of manufacturing and the lack of infrastructure that is the cause of holding Africa back. Africa has to be industrialized, and that requires a manufacturing sector, and that requires a density of infrastructure. And these are the two things that I work on. And I've had many discussions with many people from Africa and so-called Africanists in the United States, and they don't understand this concept completely. And so we have to be brutally honest, because this is what has to be done. Every other good-spirited idea is fine, but unless you do this, you won't change Africa, you won't develop the concept. I know what I'm saying may be controversial, polemical, people may have disagreements. I love disagreements. But this is what I know to be true. And I recently wrote a paper on this. I wrote a paper which I'm going to just give a short quote. The lack of electricity is killing Africans today. Without abundant and accessible electricity to consumers and producers, African nations will not industrialize and they will not eliminate poverty. The scale of investments necessary to add a minimum of 1,000 gigawatts of electricity to the grid of Africa requires hundreds of billions of dollars in long-term investment. Only government-supported credit will suffice. Private sector credit will not succeed by itself. Private sector investment schemes are everywhere. We'll do this, we'll do that. And what I'm going to tell you today, and which I've discussed extensively with Henrietta, is we need something different. We need to create a facility, an institution, a credit bank that promotes infrastructure in Africa. And in discussion with Henrietta, I think we came up with the name of it, African Infrastructure Development Bank. And that would be the sole purpose of the bank. And the bank has to be capitalized. Now, this is not a new conception. This was actually practiced by Alexander Hamilton, George Washington's first Secretary of the Treasury, and he created a national bank for development. And I love Hamilton, and I write about him all the time. And this is...
Was Hamilton from the Caribbean? I just
Yes.
I tried to share that.
He was an immigrant.
Yes, he was.
He was an immigrant who created the most successful banking, political economy system the world has ever seen. And was done by it. He came in when he was 16 years old from the Caribbean. And he was a genius. And if he hadn't been killed by Burr, he was the most intelligent person existing in the United States at the time of this stupid duel in 1803. So yes, you're correct. Now, Hamilton developed this bank, and this bank was the key to investment in the United States. He wrote numerous reports on it, which I've also discussed with Mary. But there was also another person in the United States, and this principle that Hamilton put forth was called the American System of Political Economy. That was the name given to it. Short system, shortly, we just call it for short American system. It was different than the British. It was not free trade. It involved the state, the government, to be involved in development. And Washington supported Hamilton over Burr and Madison, a whole bunch of state rights guys and slave owners, to actually support this creation of a national bank, which our country has dropped and succeeded and picked up and dropped throughout history. Lincoln supported it, McKinley supported it, John Quincy Adams supported it, and Franklin Roosevelt supported it. In fact, Franklin Roosevelt's great-great-grandfather, Isaac Roosevelt, went to the Congress with Alexander Hamilton. They were allies in setting up the bank in New York State. And so therefore, this Hamiltonian idea of credit for development has been part of American history. And little known to people about Bretton Woods was the fact that, yes, there is the IMF, and I don't think they do a very good job. In fact, Bretton Woods has failed the minute Roosevelt died, which was April 12th, this Sunday, 1945. But the fact of the matter is, Roosevelt created something better than the IMF, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the IBRD. That's the official name of what you know today as the World Bank. And it doesn't do anything that Roosevelt intended. And when Roosevelt died and Truman took over, it was a failure. But nevertheless, it was there. And if you look at what was actually discussed at Bretton Woods on this question and what Roosevelt did, it was revolutionary. And we have a model we can use. And in fact, Roosevelt's bank, he provided capital for inexpensive forms of credit to developing nations. And he recognized the essential responsibility of a nation state is to intervene and improve in the economies that lead to development. And just to give you some idea of this, Harry Dexter White was his man at Bretton Woods in July 1944. Dexter White wrote a draft for Bretton Woods. What did he say? The bank, the IRDB, was the provision for long-term capital for desirable, productive projects that serve directly or indirectly the permanently raising the standard of living of the borrowing country. That was the purpose of the bank, which White is writing in 1942. Bretton Woods was passed in July 1944. So this is all in the planning by Roosevelt's people, because Roosevelt had a grand design for the world after the war. He wanted to get rid of British imperialism, and he wanted to lift up the nations of the world by industrializing them. In a May memorandum, Roosevelt himself writes, his plan was to supply a huge volume of capital that would be needed abroad for relief, for reconstruction, and economic development, essential for the attainment of world prosperity and higher standards of living. That was what we call the World Bank today, which doesn't do any of that. Roosevelt died before the bank was passed after his death, but he nevertheless addressed at the conclusion of the conference. These proposals for an international fund and the international bank are concrete evidence that the economic objectives of the United States agree with those of the United States. They illustrate our unity of purpose and interest in the economic field. What we need and what they need, developing countries, correspond. Expand production, employment, consumption. In other words, more goods produced, more jobs, more trade, and a higher standard of living. So this concept was in Roosevelt's head, and when he got polio, he was a grown man when he got polio, he studied Hamilton during his recovery. And this informed his view. And this is what we should be looking at in Africa today. We need a credit facility. The private sector does many good things, but they won't spend hundreds of billions of dollars. They don't have it. So we need a facility that has to be capitalized. We can capitalize it in various ways, and then we lend a portion of that capital out to various countries, which that country would match the loan given to them. The loan would have to be long-term. China concessionary loans are like that. It would have to be long-term and would have to be low interest rate, 2 to 3%, no usury. That capital investment in infrastructure will transmit value to the rest of society. Infrastructure transmits value. It's not just getting from here to there. People use the word connectivity. I think it's more profound than that. And if we do that, we change everything in the economy of that country. The density of infrastructure, just take two subjects, and it's not limited to, take railroads and electricity. And that grid over any country will make every single farmer and worker more productive just by having a density of infrastructure available to them, to bring goods to the market, to sell goods, to have the most advanced technology for their economy. We need to do that throughout all of Africa. Ethiopia, one of my friendly favorite countries, they were there at Bretton Woods as a free, liberated country because they were sovereign. They weren't ever colonized. And they worked directly with Roosevelt to tie their economy to economic development. And we now see the greatest accomplishment, in my view, in this last 50 years, is the creation of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which I have visited twice. Yes. 5,150 megawatts of power. There's no dam like it in the rest of, no dam like that in the rest of Africa. True. Now that doesn't solve the problems, but it gives you an example of what's possible. So we have to have a revolution in economic development focused on infrastructure, especially electricity and rail, and manufacturing. And we can eliminate poverty in one generation if these principles are followed. Thank you.
Excellent job.
I want to direct my questions to the professor about the presentation he made. I think he did so much of research on the continent of Africa. So I want to ask regarding like what I can call oppressive system that have been built in Africa, on African continent, so that the African continent countries cannot be developed. So for instance, I would say about, for instance, food sovereignty. 85%, they say 85% of food comes from other countries on the continent of Africa. That is unbelievable, because the soil is fertile. Yeah. We can't believe how we don't produce our own food. Instead, you see countries exporting tea, coffee, chocolate. But if you go to those main food like rice, wheat, we don't have it. It comes from Russia, Ukraine, France. Right. So it doesn't make sense. And I think they said it's a like a system that have been there for years, where the food came in Africa as aid, then the farmers can't compete with those countries. Another example is about intra-countries commerce, like the way countries trade within continent of Africa. Yes, they say it's like 13% in countries, but 84% is from other countries. And also the debt, like the level of debt, high interest debt. So how can Africans be able to beat those systems which are there to oppress them?
Good, I understand. Look, all these things, this is all a result. Don't forget, what's the history of Africa? I mean, Africa is the single, and I think there was just a vote on this recently, there is no continent of any people in the world that suffered the mass deportation that Africa did during the period of slavery. So this has had a long-term effect. This was followed up by colonialism, the Berlin Conference, and then this was followed up by neo-colonialism. And then you had the World Bank and the IMF, after Roosevelt died, did not have his vision for development. So Africa became liberated, thanks to our liberator, Kwame Nkrumah. But as soon as it became liberated, it got controlled by another financial monetary system, the Bretton Woods, without Roosevelt. So countries in Africa were more developed in certain sense. Take food, for example. Most African countries were closer to food self-sufficiency in the 1960s and 1970s than they are today. What you said was true. Over $45 billion was spent by African nations importing food.
Yes.
A complete waste. A complete waste. When I went to Nigeria, and my first visit was 1994, I've been there about 16 times. I went all over the place over years. I went to every part of north, south. I was in about half the states in Nigeria. And you know what? My friends who brought me were some houses from the north. They lived in Kaduna. And they said, everywhere you put something in the ground in Nigeria, it'll grow up. Including if you put your finger in, another finger will come up. Because that was the conception. So it's totally fertile land. But the problem is African nations got trapped by the West, by the rules-based order, by the monetarists, by the colonialists, by the oligarchy of the West. And they never allowed them to develop. And whoever tried to develop the nation was eliminated, cooed, or killed. And we have the case of Patrice Lumumba, who was cooed as soon as he was elected. By who? By Europe. So the problem is Africa has been under control by a global financial system, and there are signs of breaking out. Even my friend Howard, who didn't do what he said he was going to do when he got elected, we've known each other for years, but he started to make insistence that tomato paste be produced in Nigeria instead of imported. Ethiopia last year produced 30 million tons of wheat. They need 23 million. They actually produce a surplus in wheat. So you're seeing small breaks from control of the system, but the system has to be changed. We have to get away from this paradigm of the rules-based order with the zero-sum mentality, a diseased thinking method. Is zero-sum? There's only winners and losers? That's ridiculous.
Thank you.